The prairie was silent that night, except for the restless groan of wind through the sagebrush and the creak of an old weather vane turning atop the Ward Ranch. A crescent moon hung low, throwing pale silver light across the desert. From the shadows near the canyon ridge, a figure crouched motionless, an Apache warrior named Taza. He had been following a herd of wild horses for days when he came across the Ward place. But what caught his eye that night was not the animals. It was the faint glow inside the ranch house light flickering unnaturally at an hour when decent folks should have been asleep. Through the cracked shutter, Taza saw her, the woman. She sat by a dim oil lamp, her auburn hair unpinned and falling over one shoulder. Her face, soft and pale against the dark room, was fixed on something glinting in her hand. Taza leaned closer, silent as the sand dot. It was a revolver. She turned it slowly, her lips moving, murmuring words Taza couldn't hear. The Apache's instincts told him this wasn't an ordinary night, nor an ordinary woman. He watched her rise. The floorboards creaked under her bare feet as she moved toward the bedroom door. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from rage contained too long. Inside the next room, Thomas Ward lay asleep, one arm slung over a ledger book and an empty whiskey glass. The lamplight through the doorway revealed the edge of a scar running from his cheek to his jaw, a mark from his mining days in the Black Hills. His revolver rested on the nightstand. Half-cocked. Evelyn Ward stood over him, her breath shallow. The air in the room was heavy with the smell of old tobacco and dried blood. Thomas's last business venture hadn't gone clean. Not by a long shot. Her hand tightened on the gun. Taza could see her through the thin gap in the curtain. The Apache's heart thudded with unease. He didn't know why he didn't turn away, why this white woman's trembling hand drew him in like a haunting song. Perhaps it was the sadness in her eyes, the look of someone who had already buried her soul long before death came for her husband. But before she could move, a sudden sound broke the silence. The ranch's screen door slammed open. Evelyn froze. The gun clattered to the floor, the echo slicing through the stillness. Thomas jolted awake, cursing. "Evelyn, what the hell?" She spun, trying to hide the weapon with her foot. "The wind," she said quickly. It caught the door again. He blinked blearily, rubbing his face. "You been up all night again? What are you doing with that lamp on?" Her voice was calm. "Couldn't sleep." Taza saw him rise and stumble toward her. He wasn't a kind man, Taza could tell from the way his hand brushed her shoulder, not gently, but like he owned her. The Apache's jaw tightened. Thomas poured himself another glass from the half-empty bottle. "You think too much, woman. All these ideas about justice and revenge. I told you before, the past is buried." Her eyes flickered toward the revolver under her skirt hem. "Not all of it." He laughed darkly and walked away, muttering something about checking the horses. When he left the room, Evelyn exhaled sharply. Her knees trembled, and she sank against the wall, the gun still hidden. Taza stepped back into the shadows. He had seen enough to understand something ugly lived inside that house. As the wind carried the faint sound of coyotes, he whispered an old Apache phrase to the night, words of warning and pity. But his gaze lingered on the ranch house, on the woman who had nearly pulled the trigger. He did not know her name yet, but something told him this was only the beginning. The desert had seen blood before, but not like what was coming. Evelyn rose slowly, her face pale in the dying lamplight. She looked at the door, then at the revolver. Her voice, barely above a whisper, trembled in the silence. "Tomorrow," she said to herself. "Tomorrow night. It ends." From the canyon ridge, Taza heard her words faintly through the wind. He turned away, eyes narrowing toward the horizon, where dawn's first light touched the rock's red dot, and though he was a stranger in her world, something deep within him knew he would not be leaving that ranch soon, not until the secret buried in that house rose up to claim them all. The next night came with no stars. Clouds rolled across the desert sky, heavy and restless, like the ghosts of old battles. A storm was coming, and with it, something neither Evelyn Ward nor Taza could have foreseen. Taza returned to the canyon ridge before dusk. Something in him refused to let the night pass without watching that house again. He told himself it was curiosity, that the white woman's actions were none of his concern. But in truth, he had seen the look in her eyes and he knew that kind of pain. It was the look of someone bound by something worse than chains. From his hiding place, he saw movement in the yard. Evelyn came out to the water trough, her dress fluttering in the dry wind. She was alone. Her husband, Thomas Ward, was nowhere in sight. She dipped a bucket into the trough, her reflection wavering across the water's surface. The face of a woman trapped between guilt and fury. Then, faintly, a door creaked open behind her. Thomas stepped out. Boots heavy, a cigar between his teeth. "You feeding the horses this late for a reason?" he asked, his tone sharp. Evelyn didn't turn. "They were thirsty." He snorted. "So you care about the horses now?" "Should have cared about my money when you sent it off to your dear brother." Her hand froze on the bucket handle. Taza could see her jaw clench. "He was sick, Thomas." "You left him to starve." Thomas grabbed her arm hard enough to make her wince. "He was a drunk, Evelyn. Like your father. I married you, not your damn family." Taza's knuckles pressed against the dirt. Every instinct told him to intervene, but this wasn't his world. Among his people, a man who treated a woman that way brought shame to himself. Among the whites, it seemed to be called marriage. Evelyn's eyes met Thomas's with quiet hatred. "You'll get what's coming," she whispered. He laughed and shoved her back toward the house. "Don't start your nonsense. You'd be nothing without me." When the door slammed, the sound echoed across the prairie like a rifle shot. Taza stayed long after they were gone. The wind carried voices from inside the house, muffled, low, tense. He couldn't make out the words, but he heard the rise and fall of anger, the clinking of glass, the thud of footsteps, and finally, silence. Moments later, the door opened again. Evelyn stepped out quietly, wrapped in a shawl, her face pale in the lightning's flash. She looked toward the canyon as though she sensed she was being watched. Taza ducked lower. Heart-pounding. In her hands was a small tin box. She knelt near the corral fence and buried it in the sand, covering it quickly. When she was done, she pressed her hand to her chest, whispering something only the wind could hear. Then she went back inside. Taza stayed in the shadows, staring at the small mound of dirt she'd left behind. Something was hidden there, something worth risking her life to conceal. Before he could move, thunder cracked across the sky. The rain came down in sheets, cold and heavy. Taza retreated to the shelter of the rocks, but his eyes never left that patch of ground. Hours passed before the storm eased. By then, the house was dark. He waited a little longer, then crept down from the ridge. His bare feet left no sound on the wet sand. The scent of rain mixed with the sharp smell of horses and smoke. At the corral, he knelt and brushed the surface of the earth where she had buried the tin. Carefully, he dug with his hands until his fingers touched metal. Inside the tin was not gold, not money, but letters, pages of ink faded and stained. He couldn't read English, but he saw drawings in the margins, strange maps, and one thing more, a symbol burned into the paper. A snake coiled around a pickaxe, the mark of a mining gang. Taza's eyes narrowed. He had seen that mark before years ago on men who came through Apache land, burning, killing, taking. He stared at the house again, realization dawning. This wasn't just a bitter marriage. This was something darker. He placed the box back, covering it as it was, and disappeared into the night. The rain washing away his tracks. Inside the house, Evelyn Ward lay awake, eyes open, whispering to herself in the darkness. "Tomorrow," she murmured again, her voice breaking. "Tomorrow I finish it." And far beyond the canyon, thunder rumbled like an omen, as if the desert itself was warning what tomorrow might bring. Dawn broke over the desert like a wound red and raw. The rain had passed, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean yet heavy with unspoken things. Steam rose from the wet ground, curling around the fences and cacti like ghosts returning to their graves. From the ridge, Taza watched as Evelyn Ward emerged from the house. Pale and weary, her hair pinned loosely, her eyes hollow from sleeplessness. She moved like a woman bound to a decision she could no longer avoid. He saw her approach the corral, the same spot where she had buried the tin box. She looked around, cautious, then uncovered it. Taza watched her open it, scan the papers, and tuck them into her dress. Whatever was written there, it wasn't love letters. It was something that burned behind her eyes with purpose. Moments later, a voice bellowed from the porch. "Evelyn!" Thomas Ward stepped into the light, his vest half-buttoned, gun belt hanging from his hip. Even in daylight, he carried the air of danger. She turned, startled, clutching the box. "You scared me." "What's that?" He pointed at the tin. "Nothing," she said quickly, hiding it behind her. He strode forward, snatched it from her hands, and pried it open. As his eyes scanned the papers, his expression shifted from confusion to fury. "Where did you get these?" "They were yours," she said quietly. "You kept them from me." "From everyone." He slammed the box shut and grabbed her by the shoulders. "You think you understand what this means?" "You don't. You were supposed to stay out of my business." Her voice quivered, but there was steel beneath it. "Your business was murder, Thomas. I know what you did in the Black Hills." The name hung between them like a curse. Taza froze on the ridge. He knew that name, the Black Hills, the place where his people's sacred lands had been torn apart by gold miners. He remembered stories of white men with the snake and pickaxe mark, burning villages and leaving nothing but bones. Thomas Ward had been one of them. Taza's breath came slow and hard. The woman's hatred now made sense. She wasn't just trying to kill a cruel husband. She was trying to erase a monster. Thomas shoved her backward. "You don't know what you're talking about." Evelyn stumbled, clutching the dirt. "You killed men, Thomas. Native men, women, children. You took their gold and called it business. I saw the ledgers. I saw the blood." He raised his hand to strike her, but she didn't flinch. "Go on," she whispered. "It won't change what you are." He stopped, his eyes narrowing. "You think anyone will believe you? You're just a bored wife with too much imagination." She stared at him, defiant. "Maybe, but you won't live to hear them doubt me." Thomas laughed, the sound cold as steel. "You planning to shoot me, sweetheart? You don't have the guts." She said nothing, but her hand drifted toward her dress pocket. He saw it, and moved first. The shot echoed across the prairie like thunder. Birds scattered from the trees. Horses reared in the corral. Taza leapt to his feet, heart hammering. But the gun wasn't in Evelyn's hand. It was in Thomas's. She fell to her knees, clutching her arm, blood blooming through her sleeve. The revolver she'd been reaching for slipped from her grasp and hit the dirt. Thomas advanced, fury blazing in his eyes. "I told you not to cross me." Taza moved before he could think. He sprinted down the ridge, silent and fast, his moccasins barely touching the wet ground. Thomas raised the gun again, but before he could fire, a hand struck from behind him. The revolver flew from his grip, landing in the mud. Thomas whirled, staring at the shirtless Apache warrior standing between him and his wife. "Who the hell?" Taza's voice was calm but deadly. "You killed my people." Recognition flashed in Thomas's eyes, followed by contempt. "Another savage? You don't belong here." Taza's jaw tightened. Neither do you. The two men circled each other, the wind swirling dust around their boots. Evelyn, clutching her bleeding arm, could only watch. Tears mixing with rain. Thomas lunged for the fallen gun, but Taza was faster. His hand clamped around Thomas's wrist. The two struggled, boots grinding into the dirt. Then, with one swift motion, Taza slammed him to the ground. The gun fired again. But this time the bullet went nowhere near its mark. Taza stood over him, breathing hard, lightning flashing across his scarred chest. Evelyn's voice trembled through the storm. "Don't kill him," she whispered. "Not yet." Taza looked down at her, confusion flickering in his eyes. And then, through the rain, he saw it, the tin box still lying open, its papers fluttering in the wind. Whatever Evelyn planned next wasn't over. Rain still dripped from the eaves of the ranch house as the storm broke apart. The thunder was gone now, replaced by the low hum of wind rolling through the grass. But inside that silence, three people stood caught between life and vengeance. Taza kept his stance firm. Breathing hard, his dark eyes locked on Thomas Ward, who lay sprawled in the mud, his chest heaving. The man's pride was wounded more than his body. Evelyn clutched her bleeding arm and whispered, "Let him live. Just for now." Taza turned his gaze to her. The stormlight made her eyes glisten with both pain and something deeper resolve. "Why?" Taza asked in his low, graveled tone. "He tried to kill you." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Because I need him to tell the truth before he dies." Thomas barked a bitter laugh, coughing up mud. "You think anyone's going to care about your fairy tales, Evelyn? The world don't care about dead Indians or lying wives." Taza's hand tightened around the revolver. "You speak of my people," he said coldly. "Careful with your tongue." Thomas smirked. "Your people? I buried more of your kind than I can count." The warrior's jaw clenched, fury flickering behind his calm. But Evelyn's voice cut through. "Stop." She knelt beside the tin box, her wounded arm trembling, and pulled out the damp papers inside. "These letters aren't mine," she said softly. "They're his partner's, Jonas Reed. He wrote them before Thomas killed him." Taza frowned. "Killed him?" Thomas scoffed. "He was a traitor. He wanted to split the gold with those savages. He got what he deserved." Evelyn's voice trembled but didn't break. "You didn't just kill him, Thomas. You killed his wife, too. You burned their home and took the gold from that canyon. That's what those ledgers are, the names of the men you murdered for it." Taza stepped closer, the stormlight glinting off the tribal beads around his neck. "The snake and pickaxe mark," he said. "You were part of that gang." Thomas's eyes hardened. "You know nothing, savage. You don't belong in this." Evelyn turned to Taza, her face pale but resolute. "He and his men found gold in Apache land years ago. They dug it out with blood. When the army came, he hid the loot and vanished. I found the map in that box Jonas's last letter told where it was buried. Thomas killed him before he could tell the law." Taza's breath came slow, deliberate. "You plan to find it?" Evelyn shook her head. "No, I plan to burn it." Thomas growled. "You destroy a fortune?" She glared at him. "It's cursed gold, soaked in blood. You think that kind of sin sleeps quietly?" Taza could feel the truth in her words. The desert had its own justice, and blood never truly vanished from its sand. Thomas suddenly lunged. He threw a handful of mud into Taza's face and grabbed the revolver lying near his boot. But Taza recovered faster than Thomas expected. The Apache kicked the man's arm aside, and the gun fired wildly, the bullet tearing through the porch post. Evelyn screamed, shielding her face. Taza pinned Thomas down with his knee and twisted the gun away. For a moment, the two men locked eyes, one filled with hatred, the other with an ancient calm that came from surviving things the white man couldn't imagine. "Enough," Evelyn said, her voice cracking. "No more killing." Taza looked at her, then slowly stood, tossing the revolver into the dirt. Thomas lay gasping, blood from a cut on his forehead mixing with the rain. "You'll both hang for this," he spat. "No one will believe the word of a squaw-loving murderer and his witch wife." Evelyn stepped forward, her pain forgotten. "Then let's make sure there's nothing left to hang us for." She picked up the papers, stuffed them into the tin box, and nodded toward the barn. "Help me, Taza. There's something I want him to see before he dies." Taza said nothing, but followed her as she led them into the dim barn. Lightning flared again, casting long shadows over broken tools. Hay bales and an old wagon covered with a tarp. Evelyn pulled the tarp away, revealing barrels marked with the same snake and pickaxe emblem. Taza's eyes widened. "What is this?" "Proof," she whispered. "And his grave." Thomas froze in the doorway, staring at the barrels, each one filled with stolen gold dust. His mouth opened, but no words came. Evelyn met his gaze with cold finality. "Tomorrow the sheriff will come. You'll confess. Or this barn goes up in flames with your gold inside." Taza said quietly, "If he refuses?" Evelyn's voice turned to steel. "Then the desert will finally take back what it's owed." Thomas looked at her, then at the Apache. And for the first time in his life, the man who had killed without mercy felt fear. Morning came sharp and clear, the sky washed clean by the storm. The desert shimmered with wet gold light, and the air carried the scent of sage and smoke. But inside the Ward Ranch, peace was nowhere to be found. Evelyn Ward sat at the kitchen table, her wounded arm bandaged with a torn strip of linen. Across from her, Taza stood silently by the window, watching the road that led from the valley. His bare chest caught the morning light, scars glinting like ancient stories carved into his skin. The house was quiet, except for the occasional groan of a floorboard where Thomas Ward paced back and forth like a caged wolf. His eyes were bloodshot, his pride shattered. Every time Evelyn looked up, she saw the man who had destroyed lives and yet, somehow, refused to believe his sins would ever reach him. "You really think the sheriff's going to believe this nonsense?" Thomas muttered. "That I murdered some miner 10 years ago. That I stole Apache gold?" Evelyn's voice was cold and steady. "He'll believe the letters, the barrels, the ledgers. The truth speaks louder than you ever have." Thomas sneered. "You think you can trap me with words? You're still my wife, Evelyn. The law protects me." Taza turned, his gaze cutting through the air like a blade. "Law protects those with power, not those with blood on their hands." Thomas glared at him. "And what are you? Her pet savage?" Taza didn't move, but the muscles in his arms tightened. Evelyn shot Thomas a warning glance. "You've said enough." Outside, the sound of horses approached, slow, deliberate. Evelyn's breath hitched. "He's here." Through the window, dust swirled as Sheriff Cole Bannon rode up with 2 deputies. The sheriff was a tall man with gray hair, his badge dulled by years of compromise. He dismounted, tipping his hat cautiously when he saw Taza's towering frame through the window. When he entered, the air shifted. The smell of wet leather and tobacco clung to him. His eyes moved from Evelyn to Thomas, then to the Apache standing silent as a stone statue. "Morning," he said. "Got your message last night, Mrs. Ward. Said it was urgent." Evelyn nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Sheriff. It's about my husband." Thomas forced a laugh. "My wife's been sick, Cole. Imagination's got the better of her." Bannon's eyes narrowed slightly. "That so? What kind of imagination makes a woman write a letter begging me to bring a hangman?" The room went still. Evelyn rose slowly, setting the tin box on the table. You'll find the truth in there. Letters, ledgers, and maps. Proof that Thomas Ward killed men in the Black Hills, that he buried their gold here on Apache land. Bannon opened the box, scanning the papers. His brow furrowed. These marks. The snake around the pickaxe. I've seen this before. A mining outfit turned outlaw. Taza spoke then, his voice low and solemn. They came to our lands. They burned villages. My father died by their hands. The sheriff looked between them. And you're saying Ward was part of that? Evelyn's voice broke slightly. He led them. Thomas slammed his fist on the table. She's lying. That Indian's feeding her ghost stories. I built this ranch with my own hands. Bannon stared at him long and hard. Funny thing, Thomas. I never saw a miner turn rancher with gold dust under his fingernails. The tension snapped. Thomas lunged, grabbing the sheriff's revolver from its holster. Evelyn screamed. The gun fired, a deafening roar that filled the house. Taza moved like lightning. He struck Thomas's arm, sending the gun flying. The two men crashed against the wall, knocking over a lamp. Flames leapt up instantly, licking at the curtains. Fire. One deputy shouted. The barn outside caught first, the barrels of stolen gold bursting open as sparks rained down. The snake and pickaxe emblem melted into black ash. Evelyn, coughing through the smoke, looked at Taza. The gold, it's burning! He held her steady, his voice calm even as chaos erupted around them. Then let it burn. The desert will take back its curse. The sheriff dragged Thomas from the flames, cuffing his wrists as he cursed and struggled. The fire roared higher, the sky filling with black smoke. As the deputies hauled him toward their horses, Thomas turned and shouted through the flames, You think you're free, Evelyn? You'll die with nothing. She didn't answer. She only watched as the barn collapsed in a wave of fire, the gold melting into the earth like blood sinking into sand. When the last ember died, only silence remained. The sheriff tipped his hat toward Evelyn. You did the right thing, ma'am, but it'll cost you. I know, she said softly. Everything worth doing does. As the lawmen rode away, Taza stood beside her, watching the smoke fade into the red sky. For the first time in years, the land felt quiet, not peaceful, but clean. The sun bled into the horizon, casting the Arizona desert in a crimson haze. Dust swirled around the canyon's edge as Eliara gripped the tin box tighter against her chest. Her knuckles were white, her breath trembling. Below them, the riders were getting closer. She could hear the faint clang of bridles and the dull thud of hooves, echoing off the rocks beside her. Talon, the Apache warrior who had saved her, stood still as stone. His long black hair danced in the evening wind, his bare chest streaked with dried blood and dust. The tribal beads around his neck glimmered faintly in the dying light. They're his men. Eliara whispered, voice cracking. Rourke must have called for them before. She couldn't finish. The memory of her husband's lifeless body sprawled on the barn floor flashed in her mind, his eyes wide with shock. His hand frozen around the revolver he tried to raise at her. Talon's deep voice rumbled softly. You said he tried to kill you. Eliara turned to him, eyes brimming with tears. He would have. He found out about the gold I found hidden under the ranch, the one the miners buried years ago. I only wanted to leave, Talon, to start again. But he, her voice broke. He wanted it all for himself. The Apache's gaze stayed fixed on the approaching dust cloud. And now his ghosts ride for you. Eliara's legs weakened. Then it's over, no? Talon turned toward her, his face hardening. Not yet. He moved quickly, his movements fluid, almost silent. He reached into a satchel hidden behind a rock and pulled out a small pouch of gunpowder, a coil of rope, and a piece of flint. If we can draw them near the cliff. Eliara's eyes widened. You're going to bring the whole canyon down? He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. The earth buries secrets well. The riders grew louder now, a dozen men, their figures emerging through the heat waves. Eliara's heart hammered. She could see Rourke's brother at the lead, his wide-brimmed hat shadowing a cruel smirk. She's up there, one of the men shouted. I see her dress. Eliara's hand shook as she dropped to her knees beside Talon, who was laying the powder line across the rocks. I never wanted anyone to die, she said. Talon didn't look up. You can't live among snakes without being bitten. As the riders approached, Talon stood, lighting the flint. Sparks flared to life in his hand. Eliara watched in awe. He was calm, almost serene, like a spirit preparing for war. They'll kill you too, she said. Talon gave a faint smile. They won't have the chance. The men reached the base of the cliff, shouting, their torches bright against the twilight. Eliara saw the hatred in their eyes, men of greed and vengeance, the same kind who had burned Talon's village years ago. Talon looked back one last time. When the fire reaches this line, run toward the river. What about you? He didn't answer. The spark hissed to life, racing along the trail of powder like a living serpent. The riders dismounted, aiming their rifles upward. Gunfire cracked through the air, bullets striking the rocks. Talon stood his ground, shouting a cry in Apache, a sound so powerful it made Eliara's heart ache. Then the canyon exploded. The ground split open in a thunderous roar. Flames and rock surged upward as the cliff face collapsed, burying the riders below in a storm of dust and fire. Eliara screamed as the shockwave knocked her backward, the tin box flying from her hands. When the dust settled, silence returned, broken only by the crackle of burning sagebrush. Eliara coughed, calling out through the smoke. Talon! She searched the ridge, her heart sinking as she found no sign of him. Only a single feather, black with crimson tips, lay in the dirt where he had stood. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched it to her chest. Somewhere far below, the desert wind whispered through the ruins of the canyon. And though she could not see him, she could feel it, the presence of the Apache warrior watching over her still. The sun finally sank beyond the horizon, turning the sky the color of blood. Eliara stood alone, with nothing left but the feather, the fading echo of his battle cry, and the gold buried beneath the dust of the dead. The dawn crept slowly over the desert, soft light spilling across the broken ridge where smoke still curled from the ruins below. The canyon that had roared with fire the night before was now silent, blanketed in ash. Rocks still smoldered, and the wind carried the scent of gunpowder and dust. Eliara stood near the cliff's edge, her dress torn and streaked with soot, her auburn hair tangled and wild. In her hand, she held the black feather, the one Talon had left behind. Her eyes were red and swollen, but she hadn't cried in hours. She couldn't. The fire had burned her tears dry. Below, the canyon was filled with rubble and buried men. Rourke's brother and his gang had been swallowed by the land they'd tried to claim. Justice had come in flame and thunder, but there was no sign of Talon. Eliara stepped carefully over the rocks, calling out his name. Talon! Her voice echoed faintly, lost to the wind. If you can hear me, please. She searched until her legs gave out, collapsing beside a half-buried boulder. Her hands shook as she dug through the dirt and ash, desperate for any sign, a weapon, a track, anything that proved he had survived. But there was nothing, only silence. She stared at the horizon, her heart heavy. You said the earth buries secrets well, she whispered, but you didn't have to become one of them. For a long time, she sat there, the desert sun climbing higher, drying the blood on her hands. The tin box she'd once guarded, filled with stolen gold coins, lay cracked open beside her. The coins glinted weakly in the morning light. Once she had dreamed those coins could buy her a new life. Now they just looked like the price of every soul she had lost. Then a faint rustle. Eliara froze, her breath catching. From behind a collapsed section of stone, a shadow moved, slow, uncertain. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the feather tight. "Talon?" she whispered. A figure rose from the smoke, limping, his skin streaked with ash and blood. His long black hair hung in clumps over his shoulders, his chest cut and bruised but alive. The sight hit her like a flood, relief, disbelief, and something deeper she couldn't name. He looked at her, his eyes as dark and steady as ever. "You should have run," he said hoarsely. Eliara rushed forward, ignoring the pain in her legs, and threw her arms around him. "I thought you were dead," she cried. "You saved me, Talon. You saved me when I didn't deserve it." He winced but didn't pull away. "No one deserves to die in greed's shadow," he murmured. When she finally released him, they stood in silence, the rising sun painting the desert gold. Around them, the land seemed reborn, quiet, emptied of violence, as if the fire had burned away more than just men and stone. Talon glanced down at the open tin box. "The gold," he said softly, almost to himself. "That's what made your husband a killer. What drove men to chase you across the canyon?" Eliara nodded slowly. "I wanted it to start a new life, but maybe I was no different from them." Talon crouched, scooped a handful of coins, and let them fall through his fingers. "Then bury it," he said. "Let it rest here with the dead." Together, they dug into the ashen ground, laying the coins beneath the soil. Eliara pressed the last one in, her hand trembling. When it was done, Talon tied his crimson-tipped feather around her wrist. "Keep this," he said, "so the wind remembers you." Her voice quivered. "Will I ever see you again?" He met her gaze, a faint, wistful smile on his lips. "When the canyon sings again, you'll know I walked beneath it." And before she could answer, he turned and began to descend the far side of the ridge, each step silent, his figure fading into the golden horizon like a spirit returning to the land. Eliara stood there long after he disappeared. The wind swept through the canyon, carrying with it a distant, haunting cry, a sound that might have been the wind, or the echo of an Apache warrior's voice. She looked once more toward the buried gold, then at the endless desert beyond. The fire had taken her husband, her home, and nearly her soul, but it had also given her something no coin ever could. Redemption. With one last glance at the canyon that had witnessed it all, Eliara turned and began to walk. The sun climbed higher, and the ashes glittered behind her like silver dust, the last trace of a night when greed burned away. And two broken souls found their truth in the heart of the Old West.